They're also really interesting in the fact that these species, when they hatch and when they're born, these guys actually undergo what's called an ontogenetic color change. Hey everybody, it's Collin. Welcome to the Tye-Dyed Iguana channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking all about the care of green tree pythons. So, the green tree pythons species Morelia viridis. Let's talk a little bit about natural history and native range. So these guys are going to be found mostly in Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and then as well in this very far northern extreme Australia around the Cape York Peninsula. So these guys tend to inhabit very tropical, high humidity, warm temperature forest environments. So we know that Morelia as a genus, so that's all your green tree pythons and your carpet pythons. So these guys, morphologically, size-wise, green tree pythons on average, they're going to be smaller than some of their carpet python cousins. Green tree pythons tend to get about 4 to 5 feet in length. These guys are obviously very famous for their striking green coloration. These guys exhibit as adults. They're also really interesting in the fact that these species, when they hatch and when they're born, these guys actually undergo what's called an ontogenetic color change. So you've probably seen baby green tree pythons. They're either a yellow with red fleckling or like a reddish with some yellow splotches. These guys are really very bright, unusual colors when they're born. And then about 6 to 12 months in age, they go through that color change. It's not fully understood why this change occurs, but they think it has somewhat to do with camouflage and dietary needs in the wild. Green tree pythons, like most pythons, can be very long-lived. It's very common for green tree pythons with proper care to live 20 years plus in age, so they can be quite a long-lived pet in terms of overall commitment. So let's talk about what a proper enclosure would consist of for your green tree python. So we know that behaviorally, green tree pythons tend to be an arboreal species, meaning they spend most of their time up off of the ground or up in trees and bushes and things like that. So these guys, we generally want to provide a cage that is taller than wide, although if you can provide both width and height, that tends to be the better option. So as far as starting a baby, generally I prefer to start baby green tree pythons in an 18 by 18 by 24 inch enclosure. This can consist of like a glass exoterra or a PVC enclosure. I personally like to use the glass enclosures and then enclose 3 sides of the tank, but we'll talk a little bit more of that when it comes to behavior and humidity purposes. So for the enclosure size for a baby, I like to start out in an 18-18-24. For an adult, I generally recommend you're going to want to have these guys in a minimum, bare minimum, of an 18 by 18 by 36 inch enclosure, but realistically I like to provide a 36 by 18 by 36 enclosure. That's going to give the snake plenty of room as an adult to actually stretch out. This species, we know being nocturnal, they are pretty sedentary during the day, so you often do see them just hanging out in one spot, but especially at night, and animals like our store green tree python Slinky, once that sun goes down or the lights go off, he tends to be really active in the evening. So I do like to provide that extra space for my adults. All right, so let's talk about substrate for your green tree python. So we know these guys inhabit tropical and semi-tropical regions, so we usually like to provide a substrate that provides plenty of moisture. This can be accomplished through several methods, but here at the Tye-Dyed Iguana, we generally like to either use our tropical mix or a mixed substrate. So usually something that's like repti bark combined with repti soil, but I think tropical mix is an excellent way to go. This is going to be actually perfect and bioactive ready for setting up a proper moist substrate for your animal. So it's very important with green tree pythons. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we talk to you about humidity, but we want a nice moist substrate layer. Second thing that's going to do is also provide a proper growing area for our plants. So for that root zone in the enclosure, it's going to provide plenty of opportunity for your live plants to thrive and flourish. Although live plants aren't necessarily required with this species, having live plants in the enclosure can help tremendously with keeping up humidity. So let's talk about humidity for green tree pythons. For green tree pythons, I generally like to have an ambient humidity that fluctuates anywhere from 60 to 80% in the enclosure. This can be achieved through several ways. So the first off is obviously manual spraying. I do recommend, however, you're definitely going to want to have with this species a high quality digital hygrometer, because you're going to want to actively measure what your actual humidity is. You're not going to want to eyeball it. These guys, they do like very humid conditions, but having said that as well, they do like airflow. So we don't want the conditions to be stagnant. We want high humidity, but we also want air circulation throughout the enclosure. So when it comes to this, hand spraying can be an excellent way to do it. However, if you want to automate your life a little bit, some great recommendations for products, I would say, would be incorporating a fogger. I would say this could be an ideal species to utilize a fogger, but keep in mind you do want that fogger to run intermittently throughout the day. Like I said, we do want a little bit of dry out in between. If you have super duper high, 95% plus humidity all the time, and there's no air circulation, that can be, number one, a breeding ground for bacteria, but also you can run into issues with respiratory problems with insufficient air circulation for this species. So having things like a fogger, or if you want to run like a monsoon system, that can be an excellent option as well. But for raising your overall ambient air humidity, I think a fogger is an excellent option as long as it's used appropriately. So let's talk about furnishings for our green tree python. So when it comes to green tree pythons, these guys we know, they love to hang out in branches, they love to just sit there and bask throughout the day. They kind of look like little statues. So green tree pythons, in your enclosure, you want to make sure that this is heavily furnished. Having 1 or 2 branches for this species is simply not going to cut it. You're going to want to have several branches in a variety of basking sites, and another big takeaway, you want a lot of horizontals. So you need to have several branches in the enclosure. This can be accomplished through various types of wood, like grapevine, things like that, spiderwood, or mangrove roots, but you're going to want to have those horizontally. Another thing folks like to use be bamboo tubes or bamboo stakes. These can be excellent to provide as well. Some folks will even make their own custom PVC branches or bars across the enclosure because they need that ability to wrap around and kind of perch. Green tree pythons, you've probably seen them if you've seen Slinky in our store. They like to perch around branches. So you need to provide at least 3 horizontals across the enclosure at a variety of heights too, so the animal can appropriately bask when needed. But with these guys too, they tend to be more of an insecure species, so they are kind of shy and reclusive. So you want to make sure that cage is very fully furnished. If you're doing plants, make sure you have a lot of live plants, or if you're doing synthetic plants, make sure you have plenty of coverage, especially when they're babies. These guys can be very insecure, as I said, so you're going to want to make sure they have plenty of coverage to hide and feel secure so they don't have any issues when it comes to feeding. All right, so let's talk about temperature and lighting for your green tree python. So at the Tye-Dyed Iguana, we like to recommend a basking spot that's usually around 90 degrees Fahrenheit for these guys. So this can be achieved through several methods. Your classic method would be to use a basking bulb. Depending on your enclosure size, the wattage of your basking bulb is going to vary. And with these guys as well, being that they spend most of their time up high than down low, we definitely recommend using a flood style bulb, since this is going to heat the air that is nearest the bulb rather than putting the heat on the ground in the enclosure, since we know that green tree pythons are not going to spend much time on the ground. So the wattage of bulb is going to vary depending on your enclosure size. So I would double check with an associate or utilize something like a digital temp gun to cross-reference your temperatures when setting up your basking bulb. But a flood style basking bulb. And then as well, although UVB is not required for this species, I definitely highly recommend it. And an appropriate type of UVB for this species would be something like a ZoomEd T5 5.0 intensity linear bulb. So that would be excellent as well for lighting your live plants and illuminating the enclosure, but 5.0 intensity is perfect for this species as far as UVB is concerned. There are other options as well that can be utilized, like ceramic heat emitters or DP projectors, but you're definitely going to want to contact an associate or speak with us for your particular situation and enclosure size. With some of those taller enclosures as well, it can be particularly tricky to dial in your correct basking temperature. When you double check your basking spot though, be sure to look out for a temperature you want to have about 90 degrees Fahrenheit at the basking spot. Generally, I want to make sure that that basking spot is anywhere from 8 to 12 inches away from my lamp. So you might have to vary your wattage depending on your tank size. As far as ambient temperatures in the enclosure, for the cool side, we can have upper 70s to low mid 70s for the cool side. And then in the evening, as long as we're in the low 70s once the lights are off, that's going to be totally fine as well for these guys. So as far as diet is concerned, green tree pythons, like all of their cousins in the Morelia family, these guys are strict carnivores. So it means they eat nothing but other animals or nothing but meat. So in captivity, green tree pythons, luckily, these guys can transition very easily to a diet of frozen thawed prey. In general, the smaller green tree pythons are going to be eating mice or very small rats. And then as an adult, realistically, the largest size a green tree python would probably be eating would be like a weaned rat or a small rat. This will depend on the snake's individual, demeanor and feeding habits. But in general, rats and mice are going to be the staple diet. The frequency, generally for small animals, we like to feed about every 5 to 7 days. And then for older adults, approximately every 10 to 14 days tends to be sufficient as far as feeding is concerned. These guys can be a little bit shy of a feeder, so a lot of folks will feed in the enclosure as it can be kind of a stressful ordeal to pull the snake out, especially if it's uncooperative. but that will just depend on your snake's individual demeanor. But generally, these guys, they're best fed in the early evenings when they're starting to be most active. As far as water for these guys, we want to provide a clean source of fresh drinking water at all times. So that can be usually provided with a bowl. Now in general, I will tell you, green tree pythons may not utilize their water bowl a ton, but they will appreciate spraying and hand misting. And a lot of times too, if you're spraying your snake, you can kind of get them to drink from the spray bottle. They'll also like lick up and drink some droplets off of synthetic decorations or live plants in the enclosure. But you do want to provide that source of fresh water. As far as daily care is concerned for these guys, your main maintenance is going to be making sure the enclosure's lights are functioning properly. It can be really useful to have a timer so we have a correct photo period. Spot cleaning any feces or urates as necessary. These guys being arboreal, sometimes they tend to be Picasso paint artists and poop on the glass in their enclosures, so keeping up with cleaning the glass, replacing that fresh water as needed. Water that's just going to sit there in the bowl is going to develop bacteria over time if you're not changing it out. So try to change that water bowl out every single day, even if it's not dirty, just to prevent any like slime or biofilm coming up in your water bowl. And then as well, just checking on the snake. Now, one thing I will say in general, as far as handling is concerned for the green tree python, this species tends to be more of a hands-off species. So in general, most green tree pythons, they're going to be great as a display pet to enjoy, observe, and interact with, but it's not going to be an animal necessarily that's going to sit there and watch TV with you. These guys are known for having a bit more of a fiery temperament as well, so they are known to be bitey. So in general, for a green tree python, you might want to consider having a hook or something like that when it comes to handling, because they can be a little bit spicy when it comes to getting them outside of their enclosure. And these guys in the wild, they have a lot of dietary material that tends to be birds and things that fly and things like that. So those teeth are pretty darn long. They're long and curved for basically snagging flying prey. So green tree pythons can be a little bitey, so if you're looking for a species that's more handleable, maybe a green tree is not necessarily the best option. As well, these guys can be prone to being a little bit more high stress, so for that reason alone, I like to be a little bit more hands-off when it comes to green tree pythons. If you have any questions about green tree pythons or their care, be sure to stop in store, send us a message online, or give us a call. Thanks and have an awesome week, guys.